So right now, the Annecy Festival is in full swing, and Real Effects made a huge splash there. They announced that the Book of Life 2 is happening. The Book of Life, if you've been, reading for me for a long while, or you watch my latest rambles, the Book of Life is an animated feature I continue to champion because of how it eschews the hyper-realism of the computer animation world. Every computer animated 90% of the computer animated movies being made by the American animation industry are going for this hyper-real look, where, like, even if the character designs and shapes are unrealistic, it doesn't matter. The movies themselves are still hyper-realistic and very textured and, look like live action, but with some minor enhancements to make the characters look more cartoony and to make the settings look more cartoony. It's just basically animating real life and adding some minor little enhancements to it. But I look at a movie like The Book of Life, it's so abstract. I think it really seizes on all the it seizes on animation's limitlessness, and it shows that with CGI, you can still innovate. You don't have to go for the most realistic looking thing ever. You don't have to copy Pixar's overall, not house style, as I explained in the last video, but, the look, the texture, the feel of their movies. You don't have to make it this quasi-live action looking thing. You can make it, animation's most unique, strength is that it's unreal. And I think all the great masters of animation exploited this. And I think it's inherent with the medium. The best thing about the medium is that it's not real life. Take advantage of that. It's like how Picasso, all those great artists took advantage of the painting. Not every painting has to be a Rembrandt, a near exact recreation of real life. And that's what I want animation to do in this day and age. I'm sick of hyper-realism. So, I'm glad that The Book of Life is getting a sequel, because The Book of Life, all things considered, wasn't all that successful at the box office. But unlike most animated features, it didn't have any merchandising deals or campaigns or things breathing down its neck, no tie-ins, so it wasn't expected to be a huge-ass blockbuster. And I talked about this in the last video. We're seeing a sort of resurgence of small-scale animated features, what with Captain Underpants being a $38 million movie doing so well, opening at the box office and being put out by a big studio. Yeah, the fact that The Book of Life is getting a sequel, and, Real Effects, it's great that they're doing this, and Jorge Gutierrez, the director-writer of The Book of Life, he commented on how The Book of Life had a cult following after its theatrical release, and that everybody, knows it now, and it was huge at conventions, and it's funny that people are now trying to say that Coco is a ripoff of The Book of Life. It's like, well, where were all those people back when Book of Life came out? With all the people saying that Coco was a ripoff of The Book of Life, you would have thought that, The Book of Life was a blockbuster that everybody saw in droves. But I'm not going to get into that. It's great that The Book of Life has found an audience outside of its theatrical run, because it is true that animation can, animated features can live second and third lives on home video, through TV airings, and through a resurgence of some sorts. It's happened to Disney films even. Pinocchio flopped at the box office when it first came out, as did Fantasia. Fantasia didn't turn a dime at the box office until its 1969 re-release. That was 29 years after the film first premiered in 1940. So, sometimes these things take time. There are some animated features, a good example would be Don Bluth's All Dogs Go to Heaven. That had trouble in theaters, it just did okay business. But when it was released on video, it actually did pretty well. And I suppose that a lot of people who have fond memories of All Dogs Go to Heaven have them because they watched the VHS a lot. The same thing with The Secret of Nim. That was another film, another Don Bluth film, that didn't do well at the box office. But when it was released on video, more people saw it, and the video sold pretty well. So I'm happy to hear that The Book of Life had a second life on video, a second life that was big enough to guarantee a theatrical sequel. Well, who knows if the sequel will go theatrical, because, you got to get a distributor for these things, but I certainly hope it's theatrical, because if it goes direct to video, that would just really suck. Even if it had the same production values as the original, it would be great if that thing got a theatrical release, like Fox would, sign up with Real Effects to do The Book of Life sequel, because they released the first Book of Life theatrically wide in the States. So they should do that with The Book of Life too. Honestly, I'm surprised that, because of how Fox is beefing up their animation slate, I'm surprised that they don't partner with Real Effects, because, DreamWorks deal is over now that Captain Underpants is out and, has been completed, and that the next DreamWorks feature is going to be for Universal, and every future DreamWorks picture is going to be a Universal release. I think it would be great if Fox signed with Real Effects and said that they're going to release their other pictures that are in development, Wish Police and Jorge Gutierrez's own Kung Fu Space Punch. That also made a splash at Annecy. There's a new piece of concept artwork, and it's just so gorgeous. It looks like, it looks a lot like his style that we saw in the Book of Life, and it's cool that he's giving us another story that comes from his background, his cultural background and such, and that it's going to be this epic mashup of spaghetti westerns and 90s kung fu movies and space epics from the 70s and 80s. It's going to be this real cross-genre animated film, and that's something animation needs. Wildly creative ideas like that. Not mild movies, like Despicable Me, where there's a few cartoony things in the real world, and that's it. I'm not trying to knock Despicable Me, because I liked the first one, and I thought the first one had a clever premise, but with each sequel and such, it's just, oh, it's the real world, and there's a couple cartoony things like these minions over here, and some of these spy gadgets. Whereas something like this, I think it takes full advantage of animation, this space opera where there's, other planets, and kung fu and spaghetti westerns and such, world building. I especially love animated movies that have world building. Look at Zootopia, that created a whole world of animals and based everything around the animals themselves, rather than something like Sing, where it's just the real world, but everybody's an animal, and they're just animals being like humans. Zootopia worked all the animal traits into the story and into the setting, and everything was to scale. Something like this is Kung Fu Space Punch. This is something I want to see in animation. And in the article I read, they hinted at it being a true sci-fi movie and that it's going to comment on what's going on today and what will happen in the future. To me, good science fiction does that. And I see a lot of animated movies that are labeled as sci-fi movies because they have an alien in it or something, or time travel. It's like, well, look, there's monsters versus aliens, there's Escape from Planet Earth, those are sci-fi. It's like, okay, that's light sci-fi. It's like, go real, go make a real sci-fi movie. Make something like Wall-E. Wall-E may have been about robots and space in the future, but that's exactly why it was a great sci-fi movie. It was because it was about the future. It looked at a possible future where our consumerism goes wild and our, distractions, blind us to what's happening to the planet. That's a great sci-fi movie, and it's one that challenges the audience and makes them think. I'll always remember, a few months after Wall-E came out, I came across this place at my local shopping mall, and it was like this restaurant where everything was in a cup. This in a cup, that in a cup, and all I could think of was, time for lunch in a cup. The Centennial Cupcake in a cup. Wow, look at that. That's all I can think of. I was like, oh wow, we are getting closer and closer to Wall-E. A lot of some sci-fi, novels and books and movies, prophetic. I kind of hope that Kung Fu Space Punch is one of those sci-fi movies where it comments on what's going on now, and, it comments on the possible future and things we ought to look out for. That to me is good, compelling sci-fi. Just sticking a couple robots or aliens or, stuff like that into a movie and calling it sci-fi, to me that's just like diet sci-fi. There's nothing wrong with making a movie about aliens or robots or time travel. I don't have anything against something with a sci-fi tinge to it, but I want to see more animated sci-fi movies made here in America that really get into it. Japan has done it. There's plenty of anime sci-fi that's actual true sci-fi. Oh, I don't want to say actual sci-fi, but real hardcore sci-fi. Sci-fi is a genre that I love. I love a lot of sci-fi movies. A lot of my favorite movies are sci-fi movies, science fiction movies. 2001: A Space Odyssey, The Terminator, The Road Warrior, although some people debate whether, the Mad Max movies are sci-fi or not. I think they're sci-fi. I think all of them are sci-fi because they explore, a possible future and the reasons why that future came to be. But yeah, as I keep saying, keep an eye on Real Effects. Real Effects has this, has all these ambitions, and they're not going to make run-of-the-mill animated, red box movies. They're going to make movies like The Book of Life and Kung Fu Space Punch. They've got Jorge Gutierrez there. He's signed a long-term deal with them. It's very exciting, to see these little animation studios and these little animated movies trying to change the world and trying to shift people, trying to shift the industry away from this idea that every animated movie has to be this safe as vanilla tentpole, we can do more than just Minions. We can do more than just screaming yellow Tic Tacs and safe movies like that. We can definitely try harder. And lastly, for this wave of announcements, I want to talk about Sony Pictures Animation. They made a big splash at Annecy as well. Now, apparently their slate is changing because up until now, it's been stated that they're going to release 2 movies in 2019, and both were labeled as untitled Sony Animation franchise. But apparently that has changed because Christine Belson, who's like the chief of Sony Animation, former DreamWorks chief, not a chief per se, but a former DreamWorks executive, she said that the plan is to release 5 original movies between 2020 and 2021, and that she doesn't want the studio to have a distinctive house style. She wants the studio to have a variety of styles. You can say that, Pixar has a house style and that Disney has always had a house style. A studio like DreamWorks really doesn't, because you can't say that The Croods looks like Rise of the Guardians, and you can't say those two look like Turbo or even or Captain Underpants. All their movies look different. The Shrek movies don't look like the Madagascar movies, and they sure as hell don't look like the How to Train Your Dragon movies or the Kung Fu Panda movies. Whereas with, Disney and Pixar, there's a house style there. Illumination definitely has a house style. You can see it from a mile away. There's nothing wrong with a house style. I mean, as long as the house style is appealing and is iconic, is very nice to look at. The Disney house style it's iconic. I know some people complain, they looked at films like Frozen and Moana, and they just said, oh, the characters just look like, they just look like characters from Tangled, but edited a little bit so they look a little bit different. But that's been a thing for a while. I mean, watch Alice in Wonderland and watch Peter Pan. Alice and Wendy are voiced by the same voice actress, Catherine Beaumont, and they both look very, very similar, and those movies were released roughly 2 years apart. Not even. It wasn't a big deal back then. Although, yes, monotony is something that should be criticized, but I don't think Disney is ever monotonous when it comes to their house style. Sometimes they can be, but sometimes they vary it up a little bit. I will admit that, some of Moana and some of Frozen, it seems like they're cut and pasting from Tangled, but it wasn't enough to really bother. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with a house style. A house style, as long as it's nice and appealing and has some variety to it, that's fine by me, and I think Pixar definitely hits that criteria. So Sony Pictures Animation, no, I don't think they have a house style, because I can't say that Open Season looks like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. They don't look just like Surf's Up either, or they don't look like Hotel Transylvania or the Hybrid Smurfs movie or the upcoming The Star. And who knows how the animated Spider-Man movie is going to look. I think all their movies look different. Even the Emoji movie, to some extent, looks kind of different from Sony's other cartoony offerings. So I'm glad that Christine Belson doesn't want to make Sony, this studio where they have to have a house style. But they are looking for a box office, smash that's like a Despicable Me, like a franchise that'll keep on giving, like an Ice Age kind of franchise. And you can see that in the box office results, because their highest grossing movie is the first live-action Hybrid Smurfs movie, and that made like maybe $550 million worldwide. That's a great amount. But none of Sony Pictures Animation's movies have made more than that. DreamWorks has a couple $700, $800, $900 million grossing films. They don't have a billion one, oddly enough. They don't have a movie. They don't have a $1 billion grosser yet. Disney Animation, of course, has several box office titans. Pixar, almost all their movies have been box office titans. And some of them have spawned, big franchise. Toy Story. Toy Story and Finding Dory was huge. Blue Sky, of course. All the Ice Age sequels have made ridiculous amounts overseas. It was a steady, the funny thing is, the sequels, they all did good business here in the States, but they exploded overseas. Like, I remember being shocked when looking at Ice Age 2's worldwide gross back in 2006. Ice Age 2 did. Ice Age 2 made like $650 million worldwide. I was like, whoa, why? It's like, whoa. And then Ice Age 3 made like $880 million worldwide, and then the fourth one made like $700 million. It's like, whoa. And of course, Illumination. $1 billion with the Minions, near $1 billion with Despicable Me 2. Despicable Me 3 may very well clear $900 to $1 billion. Secret Life of Pets, $800-something million. So, Sony Pictures Animation has not enjoyed that luxury, and they want to release something that will do that. So right now, I've been a harsh critic of Sony Pictures Animation. They really, really, really miffed me because of two things. A, greenlighting the Emoji Movie and actually making that a thing. B, canceling so many super cool productions that had potential, and C, removing directors from productions because, you know, they didn't like what they were doing with them. Of course, a lot of people will tell you, oh, I've heard it all before. You're angry about Popeye, you're angry about Genndy Tartakovsky's Popeye and about the Emoji Movie. Save it. Unlike most people, I don't think that they replaced Popeye with the Emoji Movie. They're still doing a Popeye movie as far as I'm concerned, but they're just going to do it without Genndy Tartakovsky because they didn't like Genndy Tartakovsky's take on the thing, and I think that sucks. And I also don't like the possibility of Genndy Tartakovsky not doing Can You Imagine, which was this really cool, really inventive, original premise that they revealed. They said, oh, we're going to do this movie, but that was before the Sony hack, and that was before all the management change and everything. And I don't know if it's still going to happen. I don't know if Genndy Tartakovsky is going to get the go-ahead to do this movie after he finishes Hotel Transylvania 3 in 2018. I don't know if he's going to get that opportunity. And if he doesn't, that's going to suck. So I've been bummed about Sony and removing Lauren Faust from Medusa. You know, that was another straw that nearly broke my back. I'm not a camel, by the way. Plot twist. I'm a camel. I'm not a human being. I'm a talking camel. Yeah, the thing is, Sony Pictures Animation has done so much to miff me, but I still couldn't overlook projects like The Star, you know, the Nativity retelling, and it looks like it's going to have really nice animation. They've outsourced it, and it looks like it's going to be this very cool-looking CG picture, and the director talked about how it's going to have very pastoral imagery and how it's going to have a very nice look to it. And visually, it looks pretty distinctive from the other Sony animation movies. And again, that's because they outsourced it to Cinesite, another Canadian animation studio. Sony Pictures Animation is up in Canada now, so there's that, but there's also the animated Spider-Man movie and the possibility of an animated Ghostbusters movie that might, you know, fix up what went wrong with Answer the Call. I don't know if the animated Ghostbusters movie is still a thing. I know my good friend Seba, as I'll refer to him here, in case he doesn't want me to say his full name, he suggested to me, he asked me, you know, what about the animated Ghostbusters movie? And honestly, the animated Ghostbusters movie I think is up in the air because now I'm hearing from Ivan Reitman, one of the originators of Ghostbusters to begin with. I hear, you know, he said that they want to make a movie now that will connect Answer the Call to the original Ghostbusters because Answer the Call was supposed to be like a standalone movie, and that's what miffed a lot of people when it was coming out, and that it wasn't going to have any connection to Ghostbusters 1 and 2. It wasn't going to be this story where the classic Ghostbusters passed the baton to the new Ghostbusters. That's something I would have preferred, but they decided to, you know, make it its own thing and its own, you know, setting its own timeline, its own continuity. But now they want to make a Ghostbusters movie that's going to bring those two continuities together because apparently there's a comic now. There's like a comic out now that actually is doing this. It's connecting the original Ghostbusters with the Paul Feig Ghostbusters. But I don't know if that's going to go through because, you know, there's some animosity there. Like Dan Aykroyd recently badmouthed Paul Feig, and that's how you pronounce his last name, right? Paul Feig, please correct me if I'm wrong. He badmouthed him, he badmouthed the movie itself, and how, not so much the movie, but the fact that Paul Feig apparently ignored his advice and then blew like $20 to $30 million on the reshoots. I will admit, Answer the Call was a very high-budget movie. I mean, a Ghostbusters movie shouldn't have cost that much, and that's the real reason it flopped. Because the movie actually got decent reviews, I still haven't seen it, but it just seemed like a swing and a miss. So I don't know if they're going to make an animated movie. You know, I'm told by this friend of mine that it's going to be from Slimer's perspective or it's going to be from the Ghost's perspective. That's an interesting take on it, but now that Sony Pictures Animation seemingly wants to do more originals, I wouldn't mind if they moved on from it. I mean, Ghostbusters, I think, is something they should sort of leave alone. Not everything from, you know, from the past, from the 80s or the 90s needs to have a revival. And I think little by little Hollywood is going to realize this because Baywatch did miserably. And even though Baywatch didn't cost too much to make, $69 million, ha ha ha, it doesn't matter. It still isn't lighting the box office on fire. I think little by little, I think Hollywood's going to realize, stop bringing back everything. You can bring back some things, but you don't have to bring back everything. You know, it's just like the Plinkett video, the F you It's January video, you know. Oh, Baywatch, remember that? And it's like, Hollywood, yes, I remember that. It doesn't mean that, you know, it doesn't mean you should give me a crappy movie based on it, though. If you're gonna revive a franchise, you gotta have a compelling reason to do it. And maybe Ghostbusters is just one of those things that should just be left alone. Ghostbusters arguably closed with the video game. Ghostbusters the video game in 2009, I think it was. A lot of people say that that's the true Ghostbusters 3, and that there doesn't need to be anything other than that. I don't know. Another discussion for another day. Okay, so, the original pictures that Sony Pictures Animation wants to do. There's one from director Michael Rianda, and he has quite the resume. He worked on Gravity Falls. He was a writer and creative director on that show. He's also worked at Pixar, Jib Jab. He has some short films on his resume. He's doing this family road trip story that was inspired by his life. So it's going to be the semi-autobiographical. So it's going to be this sort of autobiographical movie about a family road trip. Well, get this. This is the catch. The road trip is happening during a robot uprising. That is awesome. So it's basically heartfelt road trip meets The Terminator, and it happens to be family friendly, but that is such a cool premise, and hopefully they exploit the heck out of that. Another one that's in the works is from a commercial and short film director named John Saunders, and it doesn't have a name, but it's going to take place like at the beginning of time, and it's going to be about the first person who bonded with a dog, the first man and his dog story. And it's going to be a very quiet tale because the dog doesn't speak, and it's going to be like Good Dinosaur, where there's going to be a lot of silent stretches, and it's going to be an atmospheric film and not a noise fest where characters are running around screaming and antics are going on screen. No, it's going to be an atmospheric movie, and that sounds very exciting just because of that. You know, we need more quiet animated movies to break up the busier ones that are in the marketplace. And, you know, that's one of the things I loved about Pixar's underrated, and I hate using that word, but underrated The Good Dinosaur. You know, it was one of those movies that was atmospheric and had a lot of quiet stretches and focused on body language and that kind of storytelling. So it'll be cool to see how they pull off this, the first man who ever, you know, had a dog, you know, ever had a pet domesticated dog story. I'm interested to see how they pull this off. And, you know, there's a lot of first-time directors being put behind these projects, so that's also pretty exciting, though unfortunately none of them are women. The Medusa project is still on, but apparently it's not going to be about Medusa. It's going to be about a Gorgon hunter who becomes a Gorgon. And they said it's going to be very much like Wicked, where it's this story told from a villain's perspective. And it might be a musical. I don't remember if Lauren Faust's was going to be a musical as well, but I should know this. You know, some animation fan I am. And of course, one of the originals is the Lin-Manuel Miranda musical Vivo. Talked about that a little while back. That's still on the docket. Lastly, there's Shannon Tyndall's project, and Shannon Tyndall, you know, he's a big name. You know, Shannon Tyndall was one of the guys who conceived the story for Laika's Kubo and the Two Strings, and that film's a masterpiece. So Shannon Tyndall pitched his own idea to Sony Animation, and Sony Animation immediately wants to get that out there. And according to the report, it's going to be about a cocky billionaire superhero who must grow up when he is forced to raise the orphan of his greatest foe. Lego Batman movie remake. Well, actually, no. The only difference here is that the orphan is the son or daughter of this superhero's arch enemy, his arch nemesis, or her arch nemesis. I don't know. It's a really cool idea, though, and I'm actually kind of getting Megamind vibes from it because of that, more so than Lego Batman movie, which, you know, came out a couple days ago. Quite the time to make the announcement, huh? But I'm not going to judge it because of the similarities, because, you know, if somebody makes chocolate cake, that doesn't mean no one else can make chocolate cake, as long as that chocolate cake is unique to the other chocolate cake. That's how I look at it. So, and because this is the guy who co-wrote the story for Kubo and the Two Strings, I'm looking forward to it. I'm very interested to see how he pulls it off. And then Sony Pictures Animation talked about how they were going to make more franchises, obviously, but they also talked about movies that are going to be meant for the digital space. So I'm guessing like Netflix and streaming. And some of those animated movies are going to be for adults. They didn't say much beyond that, but that's very exciting because, you know me, I want more adult animated features in the mainstream marketplace, and I want more smart adult animated features that don't, do what Sausage Party did. And I enjoyed Sausage Party, but Sausage Party was yet another, R-rated or PG-13, and just using that as an example. It's R-rated, I know that. I'm just saying It's just another example of an adult-oriented animated movie that's, just raunchy jokes and, stupid comedy and, the typical, oh look, cartoon characters doing inappropriate things and swearing, I want to see animated movies that go beyond that. And hopefully, if any of these plans come to fruition, we'll see something really interesting take off at Sony Pictures Animation. It would be ironic if they themselves helped change animation as we're coming into a new decade. The studio that made the Emoji Movie is changing animation as we know it. Imagine that. Thanks for listening. Over and out.